This is Pick One, Pack One, everything you need to start your draft off right. I'm your host, Gavin McKay, and I'm here with my co-host, Paul J. Camo. How you doing, Paul?
I'm well. Gavin, I'm doing great, actually.
Yes.
Today's episode is Removal Ratings Foundations Edition. But before we get into what removal ratings we're talking about, we want to kick things off, as we always do, with a recurring segment we like to call flood insurance.
Yeah, so it's a catchy name, and it's super important. You have flood insurance on your house, right, Paul?
I probably should after recent things. We won't get into that. When it comes to magic, though...
In magic, flood insurance, yeah, really important that you have flood insurance, because when you get flooded, meaning you've drawn more lands than spells, or a significantly larger number of lands than spells, you want to still be able to do things that impact the board, that are still relevant to the game that is happening, and even come back from drawing 6, 7, 8. I've drawn as many as 10 lands in a row at one point, so it's not a good feeling when that happens, but there are some ways that you can mitigate it, and the ways in Foundations that we found are really 3 of these cards that can do things even when you're not getting the action that you're looking for, when you're not drawing spells. So the 3 that we want to talk about.
I want to interrupt you real quick, Gavin, and note that in some cases when we're talking flood insurance, we're also talking about avoiding mana screw. One of these in particular is going to be something that kind of insures both ends of the spectrum.
That's right.
You know, so thinking about anything that is going to be a mana sink or allow you to loot, rummage, survey, etc., are kind of what we're looking at. But there's other things too.
Absolutely. So I'm just going to pull up 3 that we have for this. The 3 cards are the Squad Rallier. It is a white creature, a 3/4 human scout that says 2 and a white. Look at the top 4 cards of your library. You can reveal a creature card with power 2 or less from among them and put them into your hand. Put the rest of them on the bottom of your library in a random order. Between the call of the bugler and the shrill squawk of her mount, not a soul slept through morning muster. So this card is fantastic. I run it in most of my blue-white, white, and probably my white-black deck as well, because of that ability. That ability has saved my butt so many times when you're just drawing lands and you need action.
What is the card that you most want to see with this when you're activating it?
Really, any creature. The best creature I think to find with this would be probably a Felidar Savior. It's really just one of the best 2-mana creatures in Foundations. You know, one that gives +1/+1 counters. You already have 1 creature on the board for sure with Squad Rallier, and you're probably finding others. So if you have a Healer's Hawk, a Squad Rallier, and then you find a Felidar Savior for the next turn's play, that's an ideal situation that just got you out of a bit of trouble because you're drawing too many lands. The downside to this, obviously, you can miss. But if you do miss, you're probably putting either lands or non-impactful spells on the bottom, or you're putting your big mana creatures on the bottom, which is also not ideal because they usually have more than 2 power. However, one notable exception to that is the card Guarded Heir. I'll pull that up right here. Guarded Heir is a 6 mana human noble, 5 and a white, has lifelink, and when this creature enters, create 2/3/3 white knight creature tokens. Fate of the Kingdom is tied to her own. Until she's old enough to rule, her vassals will not leave her side. So it's a 1/1, so you can find it with the Squad Rallier, and it makes 2/3/3, so 7 power worth of stats for 6 mana. Paul, that's got to be great, right?
Gavin, it's important to note that this card is caring about power and not mana value, which is what I thought it did the first time I looked at the card in the spoiler, is I thought it cared about mana value. And I'm like, oh, sweet, this will find my 2-drops in my aggro deck. Well, no, not necessarily. It's got more different, I should say, kind of value than that. Finding something like a Guarded Heir, for example.
Yeah, it's fantastic in all the impactful, or most of the impactful creatures that you can find with this are in white. You've got Arabo, you've got Dazzling Angels, you've got Felidar Saviors, you've got Guarded Heirs. I think the only thing it really doesn't find are like Cathar Commandos, which are 3/1s, and some other angels like the Sarah Angel or the Exemplar of Light. Those are the only like misses that you could get with this. But most other creatures in white have 2 power or less. It's great. It really finds you all of your action if you're playing white. The second card that we want to talk about is Strix Lookout. Paul, do you want to talk about this one a little bit?
I love Strix Lookout. It kind of does everything that I want to do. This is a 2-mana blue creature. It's 1 in a blue. It's a creature bird. It's a 1 power, 2 toughness creature, which is very important. It has flying and vigilance, and it has 1 in a blue, tap, draw a card, then discard a card.
Wise, washable, and fashionable. That's probably my favorite flavor text of the whole set, other than Refute, which is I said no.
I just love that the little owl, he or she is wearing goggles.
Yeah.
I just love the retro goggles on the owl. But this card is fantastic. Like, it's a linchpin of the draw second card archetype in blue that's there. Like, you really want this if you're doing that. But this is also fantastic when you're flooded. Get rid of those extra lands. You know, you've got something to pitch to it as you're digging for action. It's also great when you aren't making your land drops and you need to make your land drops. Assuming you had enough mana to cast it, you can activate it so you can discard the 5 and 6 drops that you don't need and try and get some action in there.
Yeah. This also is very good because it's instant speed. So if you want to hold up Essence Scatter or another counter spell while you have this Strix Lookout, it always gives you something to do at the end of your opponent's turn because of that vigilance.
Yeah. And it still gets to attack too, which is important.
It still gets to attack.
And it blocks Healer's Hawk all day long.
It eats it. The Strix Lookout eats Healer's Hawks for breakfast for sure.
Oh yeah.
Unless you're playing against a green-white deck and you have this next creature out here, Treetop Snare Spinner. This is one of my favorite cards from the set, I have to say. It's a 4 mana, 3 and a green for a creature, spider. It has reach, so very important against the flying menace that is the Strix Lookout. It has Death Touch for added good measure. And then it also has an activated ability of 2 and a green to put a 1/1 counter on target creature you control. Activate only as a sorcery. It's also a 1/4, so it's got a big butt. It's very hard to get through.
You are not stabbing this. You are kicking a Burst Lightning if you are trying to kill this.
Yeah, so it's hard to kill. It's got Death Touch. It's a problem. It pumps all of your other creatures up over time. I can't tell you how many times in the RCQ I was just left with a Treetop Snare Spinner and some other ground creatures, and just incrementally over time I built up my army to have just an insurmountable advantage against my opponent. Yeah, it takes a while. It's 3 mana to activate the effect, and certainly you're not going to want to spend your mana doing that if you've got a better play. But if you don't have a better play, if you are just drawing lands, you want to play your lands out so that you can use this Treetop Snare Spinner's effect. And if the first activation is on itself to make it a 2/5, there isn't really anything in the set aside from very, very powerful removal like Eaten Alive or I can't even think.
There's the 5 mana deal 6.
Yeah, 5 mana deal 6. Yeah, and there's really nothing much that can kill this outside of a combat trick or something like that. The whole put your mask on before you help someone else. This spider, if you put a 1/1 counter on it, basically becomes a very, very powerful wall against anything your opponent's trying to do.
And Gavin, I think that's one of the reasons the card is good, because a lot of times when we see an effect like this, it says put a +1/+1 counter on another target creature you control. This one allowing you to put it on itself is huge,
It is huge. Absolutely. I also love the flavor text that says, the griffins think they rule the sky, but the spiders know better. That's exactly how I feel. I mean, like, this isn't a griffin, this is an owl, but I wouldn't want this Strix Lookout to go anywhere near that treetop stair spinner.
No, not at all.
Awesome. Well, that was flood insurance. If you're flooding out, you know who to call.
Yeah, remember that flood insurance. It could save your next draft. So, Gavin, removal. Today we're going to pit our favorite common and uncommon removal spells for the most part. There's some rares we're going to talk about as well. But we're mostly pitting our favorite common and uncommon removal spells in each color against each other. The first question that we need to talk about is, what constitutes removal? Is bounce removal? Stunning and tapping things? What do you define removal as? You had something really good to say before we went live.
Yeah. So I think everything that interacts with the board that increases or decreases your odds is removal. Tempo, you're removing a creature from the battlefield.
Okay.
If you're bouncing it. It's literally removed from the battlefield. They have to spend mana next turn to replay it. It gains you an advantage. So I classify all the things that we're going to talk about as removal, and I think more the difference is a sliding scale of removal, because there's hard removal, which goes from the hardest of removal, which is an exile effect, which basically not only removes it from the graveyard, removes it from the game entirely. You can't bring it back at all. Then there's hard removal, which kills the creature, destroys the creature, puts it in the graveyard. And then there's that softer removal, which doesn't actually even remove the creature necessarily from the battlefield, but removes certain abilities, effects, or other aspects of the creature to make it less impactful to the game at a trade-off. So that's how I view it. I see sort of a sliding scale here. And so you can really rate removal based on those factors. How much it costs is another way to rank or rate these types of effects and the type of impact that they leave on the game.
Okay. So let's talk about rating things and how things stack up with some numbers. Based on 17 Land's game in hand win rate data that we looked at as of the 15th of December, the top 5 non-wrath removal spells. Do you have those?
Yep. Right here.
Yeah. So
in no particular order.
I got a couple of words, and all it is jund them out.
Yep. That's right. That's exactly what we're seeing here.
Yeah, it's interesting to note that the top non-wrath removal spell in Foundations, according to 17 Land's win rate data, is Felling Blow in green. So we spent a lot of time being down on green in our kind of primer episodes talking about it, but as we've seen, you've had great success being green in the RCQ. It's not easy being green, as they say, so I've heard on the street, on the lily pad, but Felling Blow is another tool that if you're looking to be in green, this is where you want to be.
Yeah, this is a great removal spell. I love this removal spell. It's an uncommon, so if you see this in your draft pool or your sealed pool, you can kind of give yourself a high five, because it usually means that green is open. And it's one of the reasons that you would go into green, especially into the +1/+1 counters edition of that. So Felling Blow is 2 and a green for sorcery. Put a 1/1 counter on target creature you control, then that creature deals damage equal to its power to target creature an opponent controls.
I love this flavor text.
You are not welcome in Skemfar.
That elf is very angry.
She sure is. And so, why is this so good, Paul?
It's a bite and not a fight spell.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not risking your creature. You're also buffing something. It's very relevant to that there is a +1/+1 counters matter theme running in green. You have the Gnarlid that gives everything that has a +1/+1 counter trample. So there's just a lot of packed into 3 mana here.
Do you want to describe the difference between a bite and a fight for anyone who maybe doesn't know what that is?
So a bite spell is any spell that a creature you control is going to deal damage to another creature, whereas a fight spell is the 2 creatures are going to duke it out. They're going to deal damage to each other equal to their power. and 2 creatures enter, 1 creature leaves.
Or none.
Sometimes. Or none, depending on what the case may be, yeah.
The problem that I usually have with fight and bite spells is 2 things. One, they require a creature on your side of the battlefield. So if you draw them and you have no creatures on board, you're out of luck. Or if your creature isn't powerful enough to deal damage that can kill the thing on the other side of the board. Like if you have the Llanowar Elves, this Felling Blow isn't going to kill much. 2, it's pretty easy to be interacted with at instant speed. This is a sorcery, so you can only play it on your turn, and it's pretty easy to get blown out if they kill your creature in response because the effect will fizzle. This is true of most, if not all, most removal spells in green. However, this Felling Blow has done a lot of work because it's only 3 mana and you can play it advantageously on your turn.
Yeah. Think about the Treetop Snare Spinner that we were just talking about.
Has Death Touch.
That makes this card a lot better.
Does,
you can
for sure.
Hit something, punch above rate when you have Death Touch.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's no doubt about that. Any punch or fight effect really with a Death Touch creature is so good. Let's talk about some of the other cards on this list, though. Most of them are instants. You can see, I mean, really, Felling Blow the only sorcery on here, and this isn't even an instant or sorcery, is it?
Nope, that is a creature. Let's talk about Tragic Banshee.
Yeah. I don't think we've talked about this one before, but it's very good.
So Tragic Banshee is a creature spirit. It's a black card. It's 4 and a black for a 5/3. And it has Morbid. When this creature enters, target creature an opponent controls gets -1/-1 until end of turn. However, if a creature died this turn, that creature gets -13/-13 instead. Nice little reference to the old Tragic Slip there from back in the day.
Mm-hmm. She attended her own burial service, eager for company. Scary. She would have belonged in Duskmourn for sure.
Oh, yeah.
I don't really like the Morbid mechanic. Just in general, I think that it's a pretty weak mechanic because it doesn't happen as often as you'd like it to. However, as a removal spell on a creature, you can usually end up with a situation that benefits you more often than not. You can either use another piece of removal ahead of time to make sure that your opponent's creature died this turn, or play it in your post-combat main phase after you've had one of your creatures perish or your opponent's creature die or chump or something like that, to make sure that you can actually get that -13/-13 effect instead of the -1/-1 effect. However, the -1/-1 effect is actually still very relevant. There are a lot of 1 toughness creatures in this format. Just off the top of my head, I can think of Wary Thespian, the bird,
Healer's Hawk.
Healer's Hawk,
Yep.
Very good target for that. And so it is relevant for the -1/-1 ability if you need to, but typically this is going to be better if you're doing the other ability, the -13/-13.
The body is also nothing to sneeze at, you know?
True.
Imagine a situation where you engaged in a bunch of combat and your opponent went block, 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 a whole bunch of stuff died, and then you slam the Banshee and it nukes their last creature, and now you've got a 5-power creature left on the board, and it's the only creature left on the board.
That's right. Yeah, if they were protecting a creature, this thing kills everything in the set. Sire of 7 Deaths, every single creature will die to this -13/-13 without, an insane amount of +1/+1 counters on it or anything. There's nothing that won't die to this. So for that reason, it definitely improves, and it also gets around things like indestructible because they're -1/-1 effects instead of destroy effects or anything. So really smart of Wizards to make it that way. All right, let's talk about the other black removal spell that's on here, Bake into a Pie. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Bake into a Pie is becoming a classic at this point. This was back in original Throne of Eldraine.
Throne of Eldraine, yeah.
So this is a 2 black instant Destroy target creature, create a food token. My secret ingredients? Well, I can't tell you that, but here's a hint. It ain't love.
That's disgusting.
It is disgusting. Note the fingers coming out of the pie.
This is some pretty gnarly art, I have to say. It's the lattice is really nice. I mean, really got to give them points for the lattice.
It's really well baked pie. Really well assembled pie.
This is just a disgusting removal spell that has gotten me more times than I'd like to admit.
I have been on the receiving end of this card so many times, and I've been on the dealing end of this card so many times. And it always feels great for you to be the one casting it, and it seldom feels good to be on the receiving end of it.
Yeah, if your opponent leaves up 2 black and 2 other mana, and they're playing a removal heavy deck, watch out for this one. It instantly flips the board state and gives them something for their trouble, which is not irrelevant. I mean, there's a lot of decks that care about life gain, and food is one of those things that gains you life.
And if they've got 6 mana and are able to do this and have the food immediately, that can turn a race around,
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes
Absolutely.
that food token and killing a thing is the difference between you winning and losing a game. So
Absolutely. I mean, the destroy effect is really good. It definitely synergizes with everything that black is trying to do. It's just, I think it's probably my favorite removal spell from the whole set.
Okay.
Yes,
it's definitely up there. It's definitely up there with me, but I do have a pet card that we will talk about.
Awesome. All right, so let's go on to the last 2, which are Fiery Annihilation and Burst Lightning, cut from the same cloth. I just wanted to talk about Fiery Annihilation real quick because of a situation that I ran into, which is that I had a Leyline Axe and this card wrecked me. So Fire Annihilation is 2 and a red. It's instant. Fire Annihilation deals 5 damage to target creature. Exile up to 1 target equipment attached to that creature. If that creature would die this turn, exile it instead. Fireproof or your money back. Jordan's Arms and Armor. Out of business. Out of business. And for good reason. No, it was not fireproof. I was trying to attack for lethal with my Healer's Hawk with a Leyline Axe on it, and my opponent top decked this Fiery Annihilation and not only got rid of my Healer's Hawk, but also my game plan, which was the Leyline Axe. There aren't too many equipment in this format. The Leyline Axe being the most significant one. There's the Gold Vein pick as well, and the katana. There's like a quick blade katana, something like that. There's a few equipments. Typically, the one that you're gonna want to hit, the jackpot that you would hit with this one, is that Leyline Axe. It's just very good against that particular matchup, but it's also an uncommon, so it's mostly just going to kill a creature.
Gavin, you're still main decking this all day.
Yeah, every single time. It's 5 damage for 3 mana.
It's going to do exactly what you want it to do. It's going to kill something and make it dead. And the upside of nuking their bomb equipment is just gravy on top. So it's perfect.
Yeah, I think this single card probably has the greatest change in percentages in terms of, oh, I'm winning by X points to, oh, now I'm losing by X amount of points. It can just absolutely change the game completely on its head. And, again, the things that we said earlier in the episode, does it exile? How much damage does it do for the mana cost? And is it instant speed? This checks all those boxes.
Absolutely. Speaking of instant speed,
yeah,
Burst Lightning doesn't need a lot of discussion. Mm-hmm. It's a shock. It can be more than a shock when you need it.
Do you like the art on it?
I mean, it's the Zendikar art. It's getting a rock getting struck by lightning.
Yeah.
I just always feel great when I get to cast it kicked and send it to the face and not care that my board position is just straight up losing on board when they're at 4 and I'm frying their face.
Yep. Yeah, it's a great top deck in pretty much any situation. It kills most things in the set. You always have to be aware of it. in the early game, middle game, late game, if you're playing against a red opponent. It's relevant all game long, and you can save it to kill something if you're behind, or you can be really aggressive with it and go face at the end of a or clear out blockers, make things advantageous for you. It just does everything you want in a removal spell, and it's only 1 mana most of the time and 5 at most. Great. Okay, so those are the 5 best removal spells by the stats. I mean, really, like these are the 17 lands is, we say it time and time again, it's one of the best ways to track your data. We're not sponsored by 17 lands. We just really like it a lot. It's great because it will track your stats for your own stuff, and it also tracks stats for the entire set, just to give us these ideas of trends and things like that.
Yeah, it looks at every player who uses the app and collects all their data and puts it out for players to see. It's a really great way to get a picture of a format and see what are the spells that are doing well, what are the creatures that are doing well. You know, if I hadn't seen the 17 lands data, I might not have been convinced that Felling Blow was the best removal spell in the set. But the numbers don't lie, as they say.
They really don't. And 17 lands users are often slightly better than just typical player, just because if you're tracking that amount of stats and you want to have control like that, typically you care more about your performance. And so I think 17 lands users have about a 55% win rating, just in general. So
I could be wrong, Gavin, but I think it only tracks platinum and higher players. So
it could, yeah. For these stats, I think it may also only track platinum and higher. Yeah. With that all out of the way, with those foundations being such a large set. I mean, this is the biggest set that we've had in a very long time. These aren't the only 5 removal spells. We also have our favorites, and we'd like to share that with you now.
Yeah. So we've looked at the best of the best. You're going to play all of these. There's others that are going to show up in your draft, though, that you should not sleep on. They're definitely interesting. One of these we already talked about previously. There's old Joust Through. Don't get blown out by Joust Through. I can't say that enough. Don't get blown out by Joust Through.
All right. So you want to go color by color?
Yeah. Let's just start with white. We've already crossed off my old Joust. Let's talk about Banishing Light.
Banishing Light. So Banishing Light was my pick for my favorite white removal spell. It's a 3 mana enchantment that says, when this enchantment enters, exile target non-land permanent and opponent controls until this enchantment leaves the battlefield. The champion reached for a stone, and Heliod placed the sun in her hand, the Theriad. So this is a reprint. It's one of those cards that does exactly what you want it to do. It takes a creature from your opponent's side of the field. Excuse me, not creature, non-land permanent.
Non-land permanent can be relevant.
Yep. If your opponent has a pesky enchantment or equipment like Leyline Axe, you can hit those things. It just does everything you want for a reasonable cost, and I find myself playing 2 or 3 copies of this removal spell if I can. One thing to note, though, it is not the best in a white matchup because white has access to so many kill and enchantment cards. The ones that come to mind are Cathar Commando, which is the 3/1 that for 1 mana can destroy target enchantment, which would then give your opponent whatever permanent you stole back, as well as the next card that we wanted to talk about, Make Your Move. You want to talk about this one?
Make Your Move. Yeah. So Make Your Move is 2 and a white for an instant. Destroy target artifact, enchantment, or creature with power 4 or greater. If you're thinking only 1 step ahead, you're already falling behind, says Teysa. So, Gavin, the question that I have is, if you're playing in the white X mirror match and you know your opponent has the commandos and the make your moves, are you siding out your banishing lights, or are you just accepting that they might get their guy back at some point?
So you definitely would need to play around. I wouldn't sideboard out all of them unless they had 5 or 6 copies. But what you could do is you could wait for them to play the creature that could kill it, like the Cathar Commando, and use your banishing light on that. That way they can't, they can't kill it, or whatever they get back, it's not going to be relevant. Problem is, you're basically wasting a removal spell on something that doesn't necessarily impact the board. So it's tricky.
Okay.
You could try and play around it. You could try to be cute and, try and make them waste more resources, but exile removal that stays on the battlefield and can still be interacted with is definitely worse in those matchups than pretty much any other one. Okay. Black doesn't have any enchantment removal. Green does. Green has broken wings. And blue, I think, I'm trying to think. Well, I mean, blue, you really be worried about mostly counter spells. But it doesn't really have much. So really it's just green and white that are bad matchups for this particular type of removal spell. How do you feel about make your move about the third clause here, power 4 or greater? I don't want to run too many of these in my deck because this set actually doesn't have a ton of power 4 or greater creatures.
It doesn't on the face of it, but there's also plenty of things like the Felidar, is it Felidar Savior? The 2/3 that puts +1/+1 counters on things. So there are moments where this card can really shine, and I'm always going to play one of them in any white deck. If I've drafted, I'm going to play one. Contextually, I may play 2 of them. It really depends, but I always want the one. I always want an answer to a big bomb.
Yeah,
if my opponent is going to have a big bomb.
That power 4 or greater, I find that it just sits in my hand way too often for me to keep 2 copies of it. One, maybe if I'm, really looking for removal, but I'd much rather have Luminous Rebukes, which you can cast for 2 mana that will destroy a creature, and it'll be any creature as long as it's tapped. So, I would mostly take that Luminous Rebuke over the make your move for that reason. And that there are other,
absolutely,
there are other removal for enchantments in white, like the Cathar Commandos, like we said, but certainly in a pinch, and also if you drafted, I would put one in my deck for sure. All right, you want to talk about the next color, which is blue?
Yeah, let's just go right here alphabetically and talk about Aetherize. Aetherize is one of the first things that we're talking about that is mass removal of a kind. Most of what we talked about so far has been 1 for 1. I'm trading a card for your card on the battlefield, rectangle for rectangle. Aetherize can potentially hit multiple things. So this is 3 in a blue, instant, return all attacking creatures to their owner's hand. Your opponent can be swinging for the fences with everything, and you can just say, got ya.
You know what this is really good against? Coma.
What's that?
Coma.
Oh.
Well, I guess no. Actually, it's not very good against Coma because it makes them, and they're not tapped and attacking, they just come in. It's good against the second attack against Coma, maybe.
Yeah.
It's just, I like this removal spell extremely situationally, because as good as it is, as good as the effect is, the ideal situation where you reset your opponent's entire board, the hoops that you have to jump through to make that happen, aka having your whole board open and ready to accept damage, is not going to happen as often as you think it is. And they typically will still leave one relevant or irrelevant creature back.
Right.
It's not like it's going to wipe their entire board. Typically, they're going to have at least a couple creatures that aren't profitable attacks against all of your creatures. So you're really only going to hit the ones that are actively, engaged in combat. And then they're just going to replay it anyway, because typically they'll leave mana open
But I think
during
you've also
combat.
just brought up the situation where this card can shine the most is, well, they're typically going to replay it. But if you play this when you've got 6 mana up and you've got an Essence Scatter in your hand,
Yeah.
they go and play their big thing back out again, and you say, oops, sorry.
Yep, that's true. I think that this is really good in 2 situations. One, you're going up against the cat tokens deck. This is pretty good against that, because you're going to have a bunch of 1/1 cats that are attacking you, trying to do like the claws out thing, and it's not going to work. And 2, this is really good in a situational matchup where your opponent has very, very big bomby creatures that they build up over time, like the Olenda. It's really good against Olenda. To call back to my RCQ where I lost to Olenda, because even though it's an instant, Olenda is not targeted at all, so it doesn't impact her. It's also very good against other bombs, like not bombs, but anything that gets 1/1 counters on it. So, anything in the blue-green archetype with the 1/1 counters, cracking prowler. I think that's the name of the card that gets counters when things are dying.
There's
Basically,
the Hydra
this
that
is
doubles
good.
the counters.
Yes, it's good against Simone, I guess. Yep. It's just one of those things where, it's good situationally, but I probably wouldn't actually main deck this card. I just wanted to talk about it because I think it's a very interesting effect. And I think people overrate this card because they think of the ideal situation where they wipe their entire opponent's board. And that's not always the case.
It's not always the case that that's going to happen, but there is a corner case that's also fun, is you attack with your big thing and your opponent points removal at it, and you say, oops, never mind.
Yeah, you can
it kind
save
of
yourself
sucks
with
to
this.
take your whole turn doing that, but sometimes you just save your bomb from removal and run it back.
That's true. That's absolutely true. There aren't that many effects in Bloomburrow that will bounce your own things.
Foundations.
What did I say?
Bloomburrow. We can go back and talk about Bloomburrow at some point.
Bloomburrow is great. You know what I was thinking? I was thinking of Into the Floodmaw, which does bounce anything.
Yes, and that card is sweet. That is one of my favorite cards in Bloomburrow because it's creature or give you a gift and get anything.
Bounce anything. And it's only 1 mana as opposed to 4. Okay, so moving on. Let's talk about other blue removal. We talked about it a little bit earlier, but Essence Scatter is really interesting because it is removal. Right?
In a certain way, yeah. So
Essence Scatter is a reprint. It's 2 mana, it's 1 and a blue. Counter target creature spell. The greatest victory in a battle is a battle unfought. I mean, that's exactly, the flavor text is perfect because that's exactly what you're wanting to do with this card. I try to run at least 1, if not 2 copies of this card in every blue deck that I have.
Absolutely.
It's so good. Like, it's so good. It's good on turn 2 and it's good on turn 5.
Absolutely. I really like that this gives you options. I feel like where this shines at least the most for me is in the Dimir control deck. If I'm not burglar ratting on 2, this is nice to hold up and just wait.
And get rid of your opponent's burglar rat, maybe.
Exactly.
Yeah. The thing that I like the most about this card is the mana cost. 2 mana to counter any creature. That's usually a good deal, especially later in the game when you have more mana to hold it up. It's also only 1 blue pip, as opposed to Refute, which is 2 blue pips.
Yes.
Refute is a great card. Don't get me wrong. I really do like it, and it counters at anything, but it's very telegrammed to your opponent when you hold up that 2 blue and another mana, because you can't really get around that double blue casting cost. Essence Scatter, could be anything that you're holding. It could be a Think Twice, that you're holding up.
Right.
It basically puts your opponents more at ease because there are other spells that you could be casting at instant speed that will make them, not think that you have it, and then you have it. I mean, I think it's one of Blue's, like, it's one of the reasons that I would probably go into Blue. Like, it's
I
one of
would
the
draft
cards
this
that I would
card
see.
very early. Yeah.
Yeah, if I saw it going around like pick 7 or pick 8 in a draft, I would pretty much know for a fact that Blue was open.
For sure.
All right, so let's talk about the last Blue removal, quote unquote, removal spell. This is that soft removal that we talked about earlier.
Okay.
Do you want to read it?
Yeah, this is Witness Protection. It's 1 blue for an enchantment aura. Enchant creature. Enchanted creature loses all abilities and is a green and white citizen creature with base power and toughness 1/1 named Legitimate Business Person. It loses all other colors, card types, creature types, and names. They didn't even have room for flavor text on this one, but the flavor kind of speaks for itself.
I mean, the art speaks for itself, really.
Absolutely. His name is Homer Thompson. If you're a Simpsons fan.
For a second. Oh, man. Witness Protection. What do you like about it? What do you not like about it? Why is it great? Why is it not great?
It's 1 blue mana, so
that's
you
great.
can easily make it happen.
Yep.
It's very important to be able to use this to shut down things that have static abilities that you can't otherwise shut down. Like if you're not outright killing something. The fact that it makes
my favorite thing to
everything go away. Go ahead.
Well, my favorite thing to use is on is Llanowar Elves. Because your opponent plays a turn 1 Llanowar Elves, I play my turn 1 Witness Protection on the Llanowar Elves, and there goes your ramp. And Llanowar Elves was already a 1/1, so there's no change there.
No. I do think that in this format, I still stick by the rule of you always bolt the bird, whether the bird is an elf or a bird. You know, that's the old school player in me. You kill the mana dork at all costs.
You turn the elf into a protected gangster.
Indeed.
Yeah, the bad thing about this removal spell, and the reason that it's a soft removal spell, is the creature's still there. They're still on the battlefield. They can still attack. They can still block. They can still get counters. This is very bad removal against the counters deck because those counters will stand that creature whether it's a legitimate business person or a Felidar Savior. So, like, yes, you're trading. It's 1 mana. You're eliminating a lot, but the creature itself is still relevant, and you still have to deal with it in some way if you want to win. I mean, it's still going to block your path to victory. So, definitely a good card. Definitely one of my favorite removal spells for blue as far as hard removal goes. Like, this is on the softer end. It's not a bounce effect like Either Eyes. It's a little bit harder than that, but it's not something that I want to be running like 10 copies of.
No, not at all.
All right, let's move on to black.
And black is where we're going to talk about wraths. We already talked about Aetherize, which can be a pseudo wrath effect, but Blasphemous Edict is the real deal.
I'm so happy with this card and this card design. I just wanted to shout out real quick to Wizards of the Coast, you guys. I know this is a cycle. This is kind of like the give 13 damage to all creatures effect that you see in every commander game.
Yep. Blasphemous Act or whatever.
Blasphemous Act, yep.
Yeah.
This is the black version of that, the Blasphemous Edict. I'm sure they're going to continue the cycle later on with other kinds of Blasphemous X. But this is really creative. I really love what they've done with it. They've kept the flavor perfect, and I'm sorry, you can go ahead. I just wanted to shout them out. I think this is one of the greatest design cards that they've made for the set.
Gavin, they're sticking to the blasphemous thing. It's an edict effect. It's appropriately named. Creatures are being sacrificed. Let's just describe it. It's 3 black sorcery. You may pay 1 black rather than pay the spell's mana cost if there are 13 or more creatures on the battlefield. So this lucky number 13 there. Each player sacrifices 13 creatures of their choice. So this hits all the flavor notes, like you were saying. This is sweet.
A demonic pact is all fun and games until the bill comes due, Liliana.
Oh, yeah.
So good. So good. The artwork is beautiful too. I mean, it kind of almost looks like a Arabian Nights kind of vibe with
It
the
definitely has that
candles,
vibe. Yeah,
you
I
know,
definitely appreciate that.
the dripping wax and the snuffing of the candles.
Yeah.
It's great. It's great. So from a flavor perspective, we've determined that it's A plus, S tier, fantastic. How does it play as a card? Do you really like playing Blasphemous Edict? And have you actually paid the 1 mana instead of the 5?
I have yet to pay the 1 mana for it. I've
Mm,
always played this card for full rate, but
still
setting
good.
up the situation where you are coming out plus on cards
Yeah.
feels so good. You
Yeah,
know,
absolutely. I love this card. I think that as a removal spell, even if you're getting a 2-for-1 or a 3-for-1 with this, as opposed to a 13-for-1, which is the best case scenario, but you still are coming out 9 times out of 10 ahead, and it's pretty hard to play around. I would say
yeah,
it's pretty hard to play around this card. Black has a lot of replacement effects, as in creatures that will die and then be replaced by something else. So, you have the Infestation Sage, you have the Infernal Vessel.
the 2/1.
Um,
Yeah, I like that
yeah,
one.
you have some recursion effects with the skeleton. Basically, your creatures won't stay dead, but theirs will.
Right. And it's important to note that is each player sacrifices 13 creatures
Yes,
of their
very
choice.
relevant.
So this gets
Gets around
around
indestructible.
indestructibility.
Mhm.
It does a lot of work there.
Yeah, the sacrifice clause is always an interesting one, especially as a new player, because you are the one that's making the choice,
Right.
as forced as it is.
Right.
So there's no way to save that creature at all, unless you do something to it. Hexproof doesn't save it, Indestructible doesn't save it. There's really no way to get out of the fact that your creature is going to die, and it's going to be in a very spectacular way.
Absolutely.
I kind of love how Arena does it too. It just kind of obliterates it
Yeah.
right up in smoke,
Yeah, I love
which
that
is
effect.
perfect.
And
Let's talk about another very, very potent effect. Do you want to talk about Eaten Alive or Stab next?
let's talk about Eaten Alive, and then we'll talk about my pet card. Eaten Alive is 1 black for a sorcery. As an
Mm-hmm.
additional cost to cast the spell, sacrifice a creature or pay 3 and a black. And it says exile target creature or planeswalker.
So technically, this is the same mana cost as Blasphemous Edict.
It
3 black,
technically
black.
can be 5 mana, 3 black,
Yeah.
black.
Yep.
But ideally, you've set your deck up with those creatures that come back or leave something behind when they die. So that 1 drop is coming back as a flying insect or whatever the case may be,
We're going to talk about a combo with this card a little bit later, but this card is great because it exiles. Your opponent can't get that creature back at all. This is the best kind of removal because once it leaves the game, there's no way to get it back.
There's also a hidden word on that card, or 2 hidden words on that card. Exile target creature or planeswalker.
Or planeswalker.
There's
That's
not
right.
a lot in this set, but that does come up. And it feels real good to when they jam their Vivian or whatever the case may be, you
Chandra.
have an answer.
Yeah, Chandra just wiped your board and you get to wipe Chandra. It feels good. If you hear a groaning noise in the cellar, don't investigate. Don't split up. Just lock the door and barricade it. Yeah, I mean, this card does so much work. I would say that this is, again, it's a common, but if you're seeing this go pick 6, pick 7, pick 8, you know that black is probably going to be flowing in your direction.
I feel like you see this at any point in pack 1, and you take it and move in.
Yeah, you might have to.
That's at least me.
I think that there's
I
3
value this
removal
card
spells.
super high.
I think that there's 3 removal spells in black that would pull me in that direction. Bake into a Pie, Eaten Alive, and the next one on our list,
Dab. This is probably my favorite removal spell in the set. I will probably talk about this multiple times before Foundation leaves us 1 black, instant, target creature gets -2/-2 until end of turn. Nuke those small things, set up a good block, put some damage on your guy, shrink it, like,
it does
get
it
that
all.
thing
I
out of
mean,
here.
the
It does it all.
-2/-2 effects are Black's biggest strength when it comes to removal, because again, it does get around indestructible, which does have a home. There is a couple tricks that can, or a trick that can give indestructible in this set. So, to be able to get around that and also have it be 1 mana
is very, very good.
It's a great rate. It's a great rate.
You can find it with its best friend, Micromancer, in blue if you're in the Dimir control deck. So,
you can also find Eaten Alive.
Yes.
Notably.
Micromancer goes up in value if you are in the Dimir deck and you have those cards. And that's partly why I like Stab and value it so high. Is
it also kills every Llanowar elf on site?
Yes.
I mean, it's notable that this art is Elgin. Elgin's final mistake was assuming the intruder would come through the door and not up the sheer, smooth 6-story wall. I mean, it's basically if you see a Llanowar elf and you have a stab, that's probably your target.
Absolutely. Also, Healer's Hawk. This is
also Strix Lookout.
Yes.
Notably.
Yeah. The little things that you need to kill, this is going to kill them dead.
Kill them dead. The only thing it's not very good against, and I will say has a little bit of a bad matchup, is actually Black, with the infestation sages and the demon maker, Infernal Vessel, that makes a 4/3 if you kill it. This isn't as good against them, just because the toughness and when you're killing it, it's going to come back in some form and not give you as much value. But that being said, I still think it's one of the best removal spells in the game.
Absolutely.
In Foundations, anyway.
For sure.
All right, so let's move on to Red. We already talked about Burst Lightning. Did you want to mention anything else about it?
I think we can just move right past that. Just remember it goes to face. Try and hold it as long as you can. That's what I like to do. I want to end the game at instant speed if possible, but don't hesitate to kill the thing that you need to kill when you need to kill it.
I think the difference between Stab and Burst Lightning is Stab, you feel good playing it on early creatures, whereas Burst Lightning, you feel kind of bad playing it on early creatures. Like if you kill a Healer's Hog with a Burst Lightning, you're like, oh, but I could have saved it for later in the game. But meanwhile, that Healer's Hawk is, beating you down for 5 damage already, and if you played it turn 1, it would be dead already. So that's one of those things where Stab, it feels good to play against the small creatures, and Burst Lightning feels bad.
But there are other things that can go to face in a way. Let's talk about Gorehorn Raiders for a second.
Yeah, absolutely. So Gorehorn Raider is a 5-mana creature, 4 and a red, creature Minotaur Pirate, has Raid. So when this creature enters, if you attack this turn, this creature deals 2 damage to any target. Anyone fast enough to dodge her horns and parry her cutlass just gets kicked overboard. So, Raid in this set. How do you like Raid, Paul?
I feel like Raid is a very flavorful mechanic. And I feel like Red in this set wants to turn creatures sideways. So absolutely. I feel like this plays very well. 5 mana is a little expensive for top end in a red deck, but this is fine, I
would rather have a dragon.
I don't know that I'd rather have a dragon, honestly. I want my red deck to be as low to the ground as possible. If I had a choice, I would play this if I needed to. But ideally, I'd rather have my curve stop at 4, depending on what the rest of my deck looked like.
Right. Well, the thing that's nice about the Gorehorn Raider is you always play it second main. So you can usually set up a combination where you'll either kill a creature that either has damage on it or wasn't blocking because they wanted to save it, or you're going face and shortening that clock that you need to actually finish the game.
Exactly.
This is perfect with the Burst Lightning. I mean, Burst Lightning plus Gorehorn Raider plus Seer Slicer Goblin will probably account for 10 damage just with those 3 cards, So it's really interesting. You really want to watch if your opponent is making a non-advantageous attack. Keep this card in the back of your mind, because that's probably the reason they're throwing away their useless 1/1 or their cat token or something else. Feel free to block if there's 5 mana up. You're probably not going to get blown out by a combat trick. It's probably just the Gorehorn Raider. Yeah, I mean, the only combat trick that really has relevance is Sure Strike, which we talked about earlier, but Gorehorn Raider is far more likely. Let's talk about my favorite card from Red in this kind of set.
Go ahead and read this and tell me why it's your favorite card in Red.
So I really like Rakdos, the red-black archetype in this set. I know it's not as powerful as some of the other sort of 2 color combinations, but I really like it because
what gives it the mojo for you?
For me, it's actually the card Vampire Gourmand. I'll pull that up actually right here. If I see this going around, even
M-A-N-D. G-O-U-R-M-A-N-D.
M-A-N-D? U-R. There it is.
There you go.
We've talked about him before, but he is great. Whenever this creature attacks, if you may sacrifice another creature. If you do, draw a card, and this creature can't be blocked this turn. 1 and a black, so 2 mana. And it basically synergizes so well with this sacrifice effect, the steal effect, involuntary employment, which is 3 and a red for 4 mana, a sorcery. Gain control of target creature until end of turn. Untap that creature. It gains haste till end of turn. Create a treasure token. So, there's 2 things that I want to talk about with this.
Okay.
1, I had a 7-1 deck that had 4 copies of Involuntary Employment, 2 copies of the Vampire Gourmand, several Eaten Alives, a Ravenous Amulet. Basically, all the tools you would need to steal your opponent's creatures and use it against them.
Nice.
Even on turn 4, so let's say your opponent plays the best turn 4 play they can play, like a Zimone, right? You can, on turn 4, Involuntary Employment Zimone, pump up your creatures, then Eaten Alive their best thing, and sack the Zimone with the treasure created by this involuntary employment. I know that's a situation that may not come up super often, but
the fact that it can is really cool.
Yeah, doesn't have to be a Zimone. You could do this with any of their, and you kill 2 of their creatures, exiling 1 of them, and give yourself an extra treasure to cast whatever you want. It's basically like a 3 or 4 for 1. And that's what it feels like every time. It basically feels like if you have this in your hand and you have 4 mana available to you and 1 sack outlet or 2, I mean, you don't even need that many sack outlets. You only need 1 to make it work. But
yeah, Gourmand can be good enough on its own.
Gourmand can be good enough. Hungry Ghoul can be good enough. I really treat this, if you don't have the sack outlets, don't play this in your red decks. This is not a card you want to play for its actual effect. You only play this if you have a way to utilize that creature that you've stolen so they don't get it back, either by sacking it to your own effect to have card advantage in Vampire Gourmand's case, a 1/1 counter in the Hungry Ghoul's case. Best case scenario is actually probably the High Society Hunter, which can sacrifice creatures when you attack.
Yep.
And give itself +1/+1 counters, and you draw a card. Like that's the dreamy dream.
That's the magical Christmas land there. Absolutely.
That's magical Christmas land. That's never. I don't think that's ever happened in a game of Magic. But the versatility of just being able to always 2 for 1 your opponent and basically eliminate most, if not all, of their board and their best creatures. It makes it very hard for them to recover from. You're basically taking all of their resources away from them and everything that they've spent time building up and making. Like if you steal their spider, like I've stolen somebody's spider before, had it fight one of their other creatures and then sack it to an exile effect. I mean, it just decimates their board. It really does. It's just a very, very good effect and it only works in certain decks. Don't get me wrong, but if you get 2 or 3 of these involuntary employments, I would run as many as 4 in this type of deck. But really, they're your win conditions.
What's the sweet spot of sack outlets before you're playing this?
I would say you want to have at least 3 low mana sack outlets. So be it, I mean, the more the better. Like if you're running 4 voluntary, I mean, you're looking for 23 cards. If you're running 5 sacrifice outlets, being a combination of creatures, exile removal, like the Eaten Alives, and then, something like a Ravenous Amulet, maybe, that can also generate you cards and sacrifice creatures. The crazy thing is the involuntary employment pays for the sacrifice cost of both the Hungry Ghoul and the Ravenous Amulet. So even if you only have 4 mana, you can still pay for those effects. I would have probably 5 or 6 of those sacrifice effects to go along with these involuntary employments.
Okay.
It just makes things like so much smoother. I wouldn't run these involuntary employments if you only had, like, say 2 or 3 sack effects. It would just be too hard to pull off the combo too often. And in that case, I would probably just go for more of a value deck than involuntary employment. But if you can pull, I mean, involuntary employments typically, in my experience, have gone very, very late in the draft. So if you can prioritize those sack outlets early on, because those are rarer cards, they're uncommons sometimes, and then, get these involuntary employments later on in the draft, or even like at the end, pack 2, pick 11 or 12, you can usually pick up 2 or 3 if they're opened. Because most people don't want to play it. People don't want to play it. It only works in this particular instance.
All right, so Gavin, now we're going to shift gears. We're going to talk about green, and we're going to talk about a card that I like quite a bit. This is Affectionate Indrik.
I'm glad you can say it, not me.
Yeah,
I always call it the Affectionate Indrik.
Yeah, not an easy card to spell either. This is 5 and a green for a creature beast. It's a 4/4, and it says, when this creature enters, you may have it fight target creature you don't control. Reminder text, each deals damage equal to its power to the other. The problem isn't the Indrik's enthusiasm. It's Ravnica's lack of guardrails. OSHA violations everywhere. OSHA violations everywhere, Ravnica. What are you doing?
Do they have OSHA in Ravnica? I'm not sure.
I don't know. I don't know what the OSHA equivalent. I feel like that's something the Azorius would be into.
Yeah,
they like rules and regulations.
They might be. I don't know. I just think that Orzhov might have a couple people falling off skyscrapers every now and again.
Yeah. They could also be the ones helping make the rules. I imagine there's a dirty Orzhov agent on the take. But Affectionate Indrik, a 4/4 that fights something, that's gonna take out a lot of things in the format. 6 mana is a little bit of an ask. I don't think this card is as good as it was back in Guilds of Ravnica. This is a reprint from Guilds of Ravnica.
Yep.
But I still think it has a home in green. If I am in green already, not that I'm ideally looking to be in green as we've discussed, but if I am, this is a card I'm happy to play.
Yeah. I think this is a signal card to me. I think this is a signal card that green is open. If I see it 5, 6, 7, it usually means that nobody else at your table is in green, because this is one of those cards that can swing a game. It is expensive, but having a fight spell on a creature that when it comes down, it has summoning sickness. So usually creatures that come down and have summoning sickness don't impact the board a lot. This one does. This one comes in and gets rid of your opponent's biggest blocker, possibly, or gets rid of a problematic creature or flyer or something that you can't really deal with otherwise. It just basically balances the board and makes it so that it's a lot harder for your opponent to either burst through your defenses if you're being defensive, or have profitable blocks if you're being aggressive. So it does both. And
Absolutely.
The other good thing is that it's on a creature. It sticks around after you've cast it. And 4/4
most of
is
the
nothing to
time.
sneeze at.
Yeah. 4/4, nothing to sneeze at. Keep in mind, though, you can also get blown out. You can put 6 mana into this, and with the trigger on the stack to fight, your opponent bakes into a pie your Indrik. No fights happening. No damage is getting done. So you have to keep that in mind also.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, you know, if 6 mana, this is your best play, you're probably going to go for it, regardless of what your opponent has going on, because it just it changes the game so much that it'll make that much of a difference. This is actually one of my favorite green removal spells, but it's definitely a lot of mana. Like the fact that it's 1 green pip instead of 2 green pips gives it points. But again, I don't think that there's too much that I would rather. I see it again, more as a signal card than something that I would be actively taking to pull me into green, unless again you think it's open.
Okay. So what else in green do we have that maybe is gonna pull us harder?
Yeah, well, we're gonna fight about this because
Yeah.
that's a fight spell.
That's a
That's a
fighting spell.
punch. That's a fight.
Yep.
So, why don't you talk about? Actually, I want to talk about bite down last. Let's talk about bushwhack next because
Okay.
this is your kind of,
This
aside
is
from
this is my
Joustaroo,
pet
your
green
favorite
card.
pick. Yeah.
Bushwhack is 1 green sorcery. Choose 1. Search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. Or target creature you control fights target creature you don't control. I love Bushwhack. It does a lot of work in the decks that I play it in.
That
Basically
tree is
when
mean.
I'm in a situation where I'm playing Bushwhack, it's because I have gotten to a point where I have drafted all of these cards of different colors that are all insane bombs, and I'm looking for glue to hold the deck together. And Bushwhack is going to help me do that. It's going to be the card that's going to fix my mana. It's going to help me hit all my land drops, play all my bombs, or if I'm having a game that's Magical Christmas Land and I have all my colors, this is going to come out later and it's going to win some fights that are going to help me win the game.
Yeah. One thing I don't like about it is, again, it is a fight. There are a lot of creatures in green that have bigger fronts than butts. I'm thinking
Yes.
specifically of like the wary thespian. I'm thinking of the eager truffle snout. I'm thinking of, even the beastkin ranger is only a 3/3. So the best thing to use this with is probably the spider. It's probably the treetop snare spinner because it's got a big toughness advantage over most things, and it won't die. Sometimes it feels bad, but you do have to 2-for-1 yourself and get something to fight something, even knowing that it will perish at the end, because it's the only way to get a problematic flyer off the board or something like that. And in those cases, it doesn't feel as good to play it. However, you're still dealing with the threat, and it's still a very good removal spell.
I think it's important to just assume that it's going to be a value down proposition for you, or it's just going to be the fixing that you need to get where you're going.
Yeah, the modality of it is really great. I think that the modality of it makes it a good card to draw later in the game. You're happy if it's in your starting hand because it will basically it'll replace itself and put you up a land, or it will act as that pseudo remove. I don't even want to say pseudo. It is a removal spell, but it's probably the weakest of the bunch outside of witness protection. Bite down. This is my favorite green removal spell. It is a 2 mana, 1 and a green instant. Target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to target creature or planeswalker. Notice planeswalker there. You don't control. This is another spell that can hit planeswalkers. There aren't very many. Eaten Alive is one of them. Bite Down is one of them. all the fancy spells and diabolical machines in the multiverse are nothing compared to a good chomp. And the art says it all. I mean, really, it doesn't add any power or toughness like Felling Blow, but it is instant speed. So it makes combat horrible for your opponent. Really, it makes it really, really hard for them to block something and not get blown out by something else. You have to keep up interaction for this spell, and this spell has ruined a lot of people's days. Let's just say that.
Absolutely.
It's one of those things where, if you're attacking and your opponent thinks they have profitable blocks, you can use your Death Toucher or your most high power creature to deal with another creature that would have killed it or would have, done some damage elsewhere. It basically offers you a lot of insurance. The bad thing about it is also very susceptible to being blown out itself. Like if you're going up again in another green matchup and both of you have bite downs, the person who blinks first loses. The person that blinks first, that uses their removal spell first, is probably going to get blown out. So you want to make sure that, you're probably using this when your opponent either doesn't have any mana open themselves or has very little interaction in their deck, or there's like very little chance of you actually, getting blown out. You got to pick your spots with this pretty carefully, because if that creature dies or something happens to it, it gets bounced, it gets, something else. It can definitely ruin your day and, swing the matchup back in your opponent's favor.
Yeah, depending on the situation that you're in, don't hesitate to take some damage and then let your opponent tap out in their second main phase and then fire this off EOT. Maybe you take an extra 3 damage or something in a turn, but that might be worth it to just not get blown out and just fire this off and turn it into green terror.
When we say blowout, we mean that your creature dies and does not. You're basically wasting 2 cards for your opponent's 1. And any card advantage that equals that. I mean, if you're spending a bite down and your creature card that you've played already for your opponent's 1 card that they're countering you with, that's basically what we mean by a blowout.
Exactly.
Okay, well, those are the removal spells that we had picked out. We hope you learned a lot.
So, Gavin,
what to do, what not to do, yeah?
On the Glass Joe to Mike Tyson scale, for those classic NES gamers out there, of all of these cards that we've talked about, who's the Glass Joe and who is the Mike Tyson of all of these removal spells?
Paul, you're probably not going to like me very much, but I have to say, no, I'm just kidding. You saw me circling the joust through. No, I think that the Glass Joe has to be witness protection. I think, as a removal spell, it doesn't actually remove anything. It gets points for being 1 mana, but that creature is still going to be relevant. If you want to win the game, you have to get rid of it in some way, even after all the dice have fallen. And it doesn't do enough to really warrant its spot. I think it's one of the softest removal spells in Foundations. And for the Mike Tyson Award, has to be, for me, Eaten Alive. Eaten Alive is probably my favorite removal spell at 1 mana anyway, and it just does so much in those black decks that I would pretty much take it over anything else that I see in the pack. How about you?
My Tyson Award would probably be, if we scroll back up.
Well, I know you're partial to Joust Through.
I'm very partial to Joust Through, and I want to give it the award, but I would say Joust Through is more like the King Hippo.
Okay.
It's great until you know what you're doing, and then it's not so great anymore.
It's true. It's not as good in a best of 3 because your opponent can play around it.
Yes, exactly. I think I want to give the same award for Mike Tyson to Eaten Alive, because I feel like it does everything that I want to do in the decks that I want to play.
Yeah,
but
it's great in black-red, it's great in black-green, it's great in black-white, it's great in, it's great in every black iteration of the deck. I play in every iteration of the deck.
I do have a soft spot for Stab, though. there's something about just get it dead early.
Mm-hmm.
And then
yeah, because the other thing about Eaten Live is you can't really play it early.
Not easily, no. You're playing it on turn 2 at the earliest. And
you're going down a card because you have to sack a creature.
Yeah, there's not many situations where you're doing that.
Mm-hmm. Stab just feels so good. It feels so good to stab. Stabby,
Get
stabby,
dead.
stabby. I mean,
Dead.
can I quote you on that, Paul?
What's
Stabby,
that?
stabby, stabby, oi, oi, oi.
Stabby, 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 oi, oi, oi.
What about your Glass Joe?
My Glass Joe has to go to involuntary employment. Because you're only playing it in the sack deck, I don't know that I'm high on that card. If I'm in the sack deck already, pack 2 or 3, give me all of those that I can see. But I really want that critical mass of sack outlets. Give me those 2 drops, those gourmands, the ghoul. Make sure I've got that dialed in before I'm even looking for that card in a pack.
I was even debating putting it in the removal episode because it really isn't removal. It doesn't kill your opponent's creature. You have to do something else in order to do it. But I think the addition of a treasure, it just makes things a little bit smoother for those effects to happen. It can pay for all the, paid sacrifice effects in the format. So I consider it pseudo removal, even if you're not playing it in most of your decks. You're only playing it in the one particular deck. I just think it's really fun.
It is. It feels good to involuntarily employment one thing and then eaten alive something else. There is something to be said for that play. You can always feel big brained when you make that play.
I think my opponents probably don't have a ton of fun when I play that deck, and I certainly don't. I don't think that it's the most excellent play for your opponent. It's hard to play around, and you really feel bad when it happens to you. But gosh darn, it is fun.
On the scale
really,
of
really
your
fun.
move to nice emotes, I would say that when you play that, it's getting a nice emote every time.
It sure is. Yeah, and a good game.
Yeah, not long after, I'm sure.
Well, thank you so much for chatting with me about removal. This has been a blast. Blasphemous Edict.
Hey.
Appreciate you, and tell the people what we've got coming up.
So next up in the pipeline, we're actually going to be doing a draft through. We're going to sit down on Arena together, and we're going to argue about our picks. We're going to really adamantly say that we need this witness protection right now. We're gonna have our debates on when we're bushwhacking and when we're not. So I'm looking forward to that.
All we can agree on is we're definitely not going to be green. Unless the felling blow is there. Yeah, no, we're really excited for next week, and we hope that you will stick around and listen to that.
Gavin, where can we be found online?
Well, we do have a Blue Sky account. Pick One Pack One Pod is the Blue Sky account. We also have an Instagram account, Pick One Pack One Pod. We have a YouTube channel as well, Pick One Pack One Pod YouTube channel that you can leave comments, like, and subscribe, and get us wherever you find your podcasts. You can also email us at pickonepack1pod@gmail.com if you have any suggestions, creative differences. If you think involuntary employment should go into every red deck, it shouldn't. We definitely want to hear from you. We want to hear all your suggestions, and we can't wait to hear all of your questions.
I want to hear your best involuntarily employment story. Tell us the best blowout you've either delivered or received. And if you have screenshots, definitely email them. We'd love to shout you out on the pod and show everybody.
Absolutely. Well, that's it for us. Do you have anything else?
I think I have reached the end step, and I'm going to pass.
You appreciate that. We'll pass the turn to you guys. Thank you so much for listening. Have a great rest of your day, and Happy New Year.